Guess it's time for the all-important, does this engine make my butt look big question. As anybody who's been watching my low-quality videos for the last year or so knows that this engine is really the only unique feature about my build. This is a Verner Scarlett 7U from the Czech Republic. I just got it yesterday. The importer from New Mexico, Brett Hahn from Braun Sport, drove it up. I also got to meet Robin from Canada. He has a Kitfox 4 on amphib floats with a Rotax, and he's building another Kitfox 4, which he is going to be putting one of these engines on also. Well, we started off yesterday trying to create an unboxing video. Robin had asked if I wanted to put this on video, so I whipped out this GoPro, actually put it on a tripod, filmed the whole thing, or at least a thought, but well, that's when the SD card was full, so got none of that. I did do a little bit of a replay of the unboxing today to show the backside of the engine while it was still face down in the crate. This is the first time me or anybody in the US has seen the front side of this engine, because I just pulled it out of the crate with the help of my hanger never gland. Real quick, like, this is a 290 cubic inch 7-cylinder air-cooled Radial. It has 124 horsepower at takeoff. That's at only 2,380 RPMs. At cruise, it puts out 103 horsepower at 2,000 RPMs, and it's 288 foot-pounds of torque at cruise, so it swings a big prop, and that's stuff I covered in the episodes a long time ago. If you haven't watched that, don't. It's probably not worth your time. Anyway, it's on the engine stand now. It's actually rotated a little bit because the starter was going to contact the engine stand, so I rotated it and we got it up out of the crate. So this would actually be the bottom where this blue hose is, the oil drain tube. It has an oil filter, which is quite easy to reach on the front. It has the, similar to the way a motorcycle gets an alternator, it's not a separate alternator device, it's driven off the front side of the crank, and then these are all, I'm assuming, Hall effect sensors to tell the cylinders when to fire. I had hoped to shoot this segment right here with the prop slapped on the front, at least temporarily. That didn't work, so here's my first problem, is I grabbed the hub for my Meglin prop built in the Ukraine. It's a beautiful prop, really well made. So is the hub. The literature for the Verner said that this would be the same hole pattern as a Rotax 912, and when it didn't fit, the first thing I did was measure the hub. This is the same as the Rotax 912, but this is, best as I can tell, 4 3/8 inch. And that's just a quick measurement, nothing I would send off to mill chips or anything like that. But anyway, so that's my first issue. It's all solvable. You can either put a new hole pattern in this, get a different prop hub, get a different prop, whatever. It's not the end of the world. So here we are, just looking at the front of this motor. So in a little bit, when I'm showing the oil tank, I'll show where there's an oil pickup line where it sucks the oil out of the tank, and where it comes to is right here, because the oil pump is underneath this edge of that flange. And then it obviously squirts through the main bearing inside. And then this is a pressure line which pressurizes oil to these top 3 cylinders right here. And they just drain back down the pushrod tubes into the sump. And then these would be the lower 4 cylinders. So this is cylinder 3 and 4. These will get oil which comes out through the pushrod tubes. This one, rocker arm cover, drains into this rocker arm cover, which is also getting outward flow, and then it will drain from here into one of the other pickups on the oil tank that I'll show later. See, a magnesium crankcase. This is a direct drive motor, and those are 2 things which contribute to the engine being lighter than one of the other radial engine options which you can buy. I'm going to put a link in the description below for Brett's company, Braun Sport in New Mexico. But you can also go to other resellers like Ted Meyers, who has installed the Scarlett 9 on a customer's Kitfox 7. He replaced a 9-cylinder, again, Radial of another manufacturer, and he did that quite a while ago. Then he became an importer also. And then there's the original importer, totally blowing it on his name right now, but Scalebirds, and I'll put a link for all 3 of those people down below. And if you'd like to hear one of these engines running. There's actually a really cool aircraft also from the Czech Republic, I believe. They did a Mitsubishi Zero where they're running a 9-cylinder Scarlett on it. Pretty amazing. I'm at the shut up and take my money point with that airplane, but I'd like to see what else they come up with besides Zero, so could be super cool. Anyway, so hub being my first issue, I bought this Harbor Freight stand today, assembled it real quick. There's one place I modified it down below. There's a single bolt which comes up. There's a threaded boss on the outer part. That part's fine, but then it's really just pinches into the tube underneath. I could see that ending badly for somebody, so I drilled a hole on my drill press in the tube, and keeping with authentic Chinese manufacturing processes, I used a dull bit and no lubrication, and didn't deburr the hole, so it'll look extremely original. Other than that, I think it's fine. Got it to work on the back. I used some pieces of well, they're 1/4-inch pipe thread sizes that are super weird, so it could slide just almost a 3/8 bolt, but I used 5/16, 18 7-inch long bolts. Those lines, those tubes are 5 inches long, gave me just enough to clear. I won't be able to test fit the motor mount or any of the induction system as long as it's sitting on this engine stand, so that part's unfortunate. But again, my hangar neighbor Glenn loaned me his engine hoist, which is behind the camera right now. He was about to get rid of it, so it saved me the hassle and expense of going to buy one, so it's on semi-permanent loan. I'll be using that to lift the engine, but that's not going to happen in this episode. Probably not until, I might be sporty here, January, when I get back from work. So here's a reproduced version of the unboxing. Of course, everything was organized in its individual containers. I'll start at the top here. This is the oil tank. Every Radial that I know of has to have an oil tank, and typically on the Pratt & Whitney, they're mounted up high on the firewall, and that's actually what creates the problem of a hydrostatic lock, because oil runs downhill when the engine's not running. You get oil in the lower cylinders and they don't move. If you attempt to start it, you bend a connecting rod. It's bad. So the Verner engine operates differently because the oil tank has to be below the engine. So while it's sitting there shut off, there is actually no risk that oil will run uphill to the lower cylinders. And then it uses, this is the fitting right here, the oil pump that's in the engine will actually suck the oil out of the low tube that's in here, shoves it through the engine, and it comes back to the tank through these 3 inlets, and I'll show those later on, but basically these are from lower cylinders and this is from the crankcase. It has an air oil separator, which is super important, so it's not just pumping frothy air through. And this is the oil filler, and coincidentally the oil dipstick. This has been modified by Brett, because he had a customer come in and he spun the oil dipstick on and he stripped out the thread. So Brett cut this off, machined a new one that has a much coarser thread and a O-ring, and then of course it's a metal dipstick, which I'll need to mark at the appropriate time for the proper quantity. And this is for an oil temperature sensor. It's plumbed for that, and I think that is it. Oh yeah, the drain at the bottom, which needs to be safety wired, and I have images of where this is probably going to go, but that's all part of the engineering for this installation. May as well jump right to the exciting part. This is the engine. It's sitting face down, and dismount the camera here. A little better look. So this is where the fuel air mixture goes in. It has an impeller, which is belt driven, drives at that 1.3:1 ratio. I think I got to double check on that. I'll put up the correct number. Starter and starter solenoid, pretty self-explanatory. This is that lower drain off of the crankcase and takes care of the fuel, takes care of the oil off of the upper cylinders. B1, I'm looking at the wrong direction. The top 3 cylinders will drain into the main crankcase, which is also pressure lubricated, obviously, for the main bearing connecting rods. And then the lower cylinders down here, this cylinder has a drain which goes into this one, and that drain right there goes into one of those inlets. This one, valve cover, drains to here, and there's the other inlet for that. And this is somewhat traditional on Radial engines, a drain for the lowest intake manifold, because if there were a situation where oil could run downhill, you get oil filling this, and then when you try and crank the engine, even if you pulled the blades carefully and had no hydrostatic lock, if this intake tube is full of oil, it sucks it in, and then you have a hydrostatic lock, and then you bend this connecting rod. This is actually just some kind of traditional thing. It's totally not required. It's just, you know, it's a thing radial engines are supposed to have, so it does. But again, with the oil tank mounted below all of this, the risk of hydrostatic lock is near zero. But I will always be pulling blades just because that's what you do. So the engine has the 6 mounting lugs for the rubber isolator mounts, and I'll get into more detail on that in a little bit. I'm just going to put this cover back over the impeller here so nothing falls in, and let's move on. So the exhaust I'll have to show at a different time. I guess I can show the induction system right now and how it's basically going to go on. Item number 1. By the way, this engine has been converted. As it shipped from the Czech Republic to Brett Hahn's facility, it had the SS carb, which is essentially a Harley Davidson style carb. Nothing wrong with it, other than that it doesn't have a mixture control. Although there is a secret method of obtaining that. This also, by converting to fuel injection, gets me away from having to create a carb heat intake box of any kind. So this is where the fuel injection nozzles are. There are 2 of them for a reason I'll explain on a very different day. This is intended to be underneath, so this being the lowest part of the engine, this is probably where this is going to go. And I'll run over all of this stuff again when I finally figure out an orientation, but this is the Airflow Performance AF150 fuel servo. And right, so this is the mixture lever. It's rich and idle cutoff. I can pull this lever off and orient it anywhere I need it to. And this is the throttle lever. So this in here is some kind of a diaphragm which determines what the fuel air ratio should be given the air density coming into the engine. And so fuel in from the fuel pumps, a dual fuel pump arrangement, and then this is an AN4 line which goes from here to this injector nozzle setup. So this will fall over if I let go of it, I think. Ta-da, looks like that. So again, I have some orientation options here. I'll get into those pretty quick, but this is how I pictured it going on the engine, with this is a side draft basically pointed straight back at the firewall. And one of the reasons that it took so long to get this mount is because there were several iterations of the design for the mount, and kind of a last minute thing for me. I was concerned that the firewall was too close. It was going to be difficult for me to get an air filter which was going to work perfectly and also be serviceable, not being rammed up against the firewall. So I did have it extended out, I think 1 inch further. It got me plenty of room. And then as a side benefit of those extra design iterations for the mount, I knew there was a high probability, because again I'm designing in CAD and I don't have the engine in front of me that I can double check anything, and there's always chance for interference with stuff as closely aligned as we have it here. But this 90-degree elbow is one of my options, and probably, in fact almost certainly, what I'm going to end up going with. So in this case I'm going to mount the elbow on here, and it's still a side draft, but it's going to point out to the side. Now with this orientation I could have gone either right, left, or up. So I could have a scoop on top of the cowl or pointing out the right side, and actually the right side is the way I'm going to go. Because having looked at the way crap flies around an airplane cowl with the prop turning in the conventional direction, which this one is, you get less junk blown up into the intake if the cowl scoop is on the right side of the aircraft. So again, that puts this here, and of course this doesn't care what its orientation is, so I can put it any way that works out for me, and that's part of the engineering that's left to do on this. So anyway, this will point out, have an air filter, and a scoop on the side of the cowl. It's gonna be cool. And speaking of the mount, here it is. There was a whole lot of design iterations, as mentioned, around this. Just throw it on here real quick. This has a little bit extra space from where I started because that oil line will now be able to run across the top of this tube rather than have to make some kind of a fancy bend to get out of the way. There are 6 rubber isolator mounts, and I'll get into that here pretty soon. This mount came out within 2 ounces of what I had calculated it would be in SolidWorks, and probably because I didn't account for the weld bead, but 2 ounces was pretty happy. It's light. It's 6 pounds 11 ounces, I think. And before Brett loaded all this stuff up, he has a test fixture, and he tested both the engine thrust, engine torque, positive and negative G's. This thing could be certified to part 23. No problem for a +5 -2 G aircraft. Oh yes. For anyone concerned that going with the radial engine automatically implies that you're flying behind the dinosaur technology, we're not. No magnetos on this engine. This is a coil pack, 1 coil for every cylinder. There's 2 of these, so this will be, I guess in Rotax terms, we call it lane 1 and lane 2 as opposed to mag 1 and mag 2. Again, no magnetos. Simple plug and play. There's no electronic control unit for this. This is just to provide signal for the spark. And so part of my future engineering task is to figure out where to locate these so that they get some airflow over them, don't get hot. Robin's engine that he already has in his hands was a single spark. He did not do the upgrade for dual spark plug. At the time I did it, I just thought, you know, traditional airplanes have 2 spark plugs per cylinder, redundancy, etc. However, in this case, you know, unlike dropping a mag where you lose 1 spark plug on every cylinder, chances are you're going to have 1 coil fail on 1 cylinder. And in this case, losing 1 out of 7 is not as bad as 1 out of 4. So it'd be less of a power loss. Less of a problem, but I still went with the dual spark just for peace of mind. These coil packs are mounted remotely, and then it does have spark plug leads that are down in here. I'm not going to drag them out, which go from the coil pack to each of the spark plugs. This is a tack provided by Verner. It's kind of one of those antique-y looking white gauges, white gauge faces. This is the voltage regulator, which looks suspiciously like the one off a couple motorcycles I've had. Nothing wrong with it, works great. This is a 35 amp alternator, by the way. This is a fuel pump, which I will not be using because this would have been the fuel pump for the carbureted version. Simple boost. I have the dual fuel pump. Looks pretty much exactly like people have on a 912 IS installation. That'll be firewall mounted. And these are the rubber isolator mounts. Again, 6 of them. I was originally faked out by the fact that these appear to be exactly the same as the one as the Rotax 912 uses, because this looks exactly the same. However, and these do too, and so does the sleeve. However, this is a different part number. These are a little bit squishier. They're not dimensionally almost exactly the same, but there are some differences, and if somebody really wants to know, I could get them both out and show them as a comparison. And to deep dive the mount just a little bit, hopefully this camera angle works. On the Rotax 912 mount that I had for my engine, they have these large sleeves that look just like this, but there were 2 thin discs inside here which separated the faces of these rubber mounts. In this case, we went solid. This is 4130. We did slots around the outside so that we could weld in this sleeve. These were tested to destruction in several samples. These basically snap in here. Bolts can go either direction. Let's do this. sleeve's got to be in here. It takes a little bit of spit to make that work. Just like the 912 installation, these metal cups are what isolates or squeezes on the two rubber pieces and holds everything restrained. This would go through those ears on the back of the engine, main flange, and then bolts. And I probably will do the aircraft additional bolts in the front, but it really doesn't make any difference. These ring mount designs allow you to get the engine attached to the ring, and then from there you can go to whatever firewall of whatever aircraft you're developing. So you can control the distance and of course the hole pattern, which was picked up off the Kitfox. And I should mention, in case the orientation is not obvious, this is the top now, top edge of the firewall. This is the outer corners, and this is the lower center mount on the Kitfox firewall. And Robin, the builder up in Canada, who has his Scarlett 7 in his hands already, but he doesn't have the mount, and he has got some other details to work out. We were pretty sure that the Kitfox 4 was the same hole pattern as this, but these two outboard edges were moved in 1 inch. But following the rule of measure twice or 40 times and cut once, Robin brought down a piece of wood which he had match drilled to the firewall of his Kitfox 4 that he's putting one of these engines on. And Robin is justifiably more concerned about CG than I am, since the tail moment is shorter on the 4 and the Series 5 and newer are designed to handle a larger engine. We grabbed this piece of wood out and set my mount on it, and the holes were, I want to say, not even close. They're close, but this mount would not have pinned up, even accounting for the 1 inch. So Brett is taking Robin's piece of wood back to New Mexico to use that as a go-by, so that if anybody wants a Series 4 mount in the future, he'll be able to hook you up. And speaking of that, if anybody is considering purchasing a Verner Scarlett 7 or 9 to mount on the front of their Kitfox 5 through 7, he now has all this information from my design, and you can get the mount through him. Also in Robin's case, again, center of gravity concerned, he's running the SS carb, and the advantage of a Series 4 is that the firewall is flat. You don't have that footwell box that protrudes in here, which was a concern for me. He's running it down from, I think, 14 inches is what we decided, to closer to 12 from the firewall, and 2 inches on this engine makes a big difference, of course. Let's see, back to what's inside. Seems somewhat extraneous, but they send you a toolkit, some simple tools, feeler gauges, Allen wrenches, combination wrenches, and some T socket handles for spark plugs. Oh. And as soon as I'm able, I'm going to have this engine on the mount. I'm going to put my prop on. Goes back a long ways, but that's the prop hub cover. Brett wasn't sure I'd be able to use this. It's meant really to be a crush plate on a wood prop. I may just throw it on for decoration. I'll probably polish this up and fill this with paint. It may just become a cool coaster for home. And some stickers, or decals as Robin calls them. So now you've seen the front of the engine, got that tour, got the tour of the backside, the fuel injection system, engine mount, the setback with a prop. Is probably enough for this episode. There will not be any 30 seconds in Alaska because I used up the footage from my last trip in episode 29. Lots of work to do. This is where it really kicks into gear. See you on episode 31. Thanks for coming.